Hello, resilient souls. Welcome to Neuro Wellness Community's Resilience Resourcing Podcast, where connections empower resilience. This is a connection space where inspiring women and men share their real on their way to resilience. Each episode, I have the pleasure of spotlighting women and men in fields from performance neurotraining to film and all in between. You will get to know the unique tools these individuals each carry and how connecting with these empowering stories bring about camaraderie and in turn empower you toward your unique dreams and goals. To start off by introducing our guest today, Pamma Watson, and she is a health coach, and she is basically a brain health coach. She helps people with rewiring their brain and understanding fatigue and overcoming, obstacles that are basically setting them back in their environment. And I'm just so excited for her to be here. Again, we got to meet on social media, and just the fact that we're both advocates for brain health, and you have a story. You've been through quite a bit yourself, and that's kind of what led you on this journey. So I just would love for you to start where you feel comfortable and just kind of share what got you started and what your story has been.
Sure. And first, I just want to say thank you so much, Holly, for having me on your show or your podcast. I feel like it's a show, and I'm really grateful for you reaching out. So thank you.
Of course.
Yeah, so my story started, gosh, many years ago now, like almost 18 years ago. And I was living in a house with toxic mold.
Okay.
And this led to a whole bunch of mystery symptoms. I had chronic fatigue, debilitating fatigue, where eventually I couldn't get out of bed anymore. I had sensitivities. I had anxiety, depression. It wasn't officially called depression or termed diagnosed depression, but I definitely felt down a lot. Which having invisible illness symptoms for a long time without diagnosis can make you feel that way as well.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I had this general sense of malaise. I knew something was wrong, but the doctors couldn't find anything. And it took actually 3 years before I got a diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome and adrenal fatigue syndrome.
Wow.
And yeah, it was at that point I saw a functional medical doctor, and he treated me and put me on adrenal cell extracts, which um, I didn't want to be on. I I was hoping I didn't have to be on them. It was my wish not to be, and I did eventually get off of them. Um, so we treated the adrenal fatigue, and I got a lot better, but it took 6 years. And my version of health then is a lot different than it is now. My version then was to be able to go out in public, to have enough energy to carry a full-time job, but not enough energy to go out after work. Um, there was still a lot of anxiety, especially in social situations, and I got stressed pretty easily. So I definitely had a very low-key life for quite a while after that. And I avoided external stimuli like fragrances and chemicals, certain foods. So now that I know about brain health, I know that these my brain was perceiving as danger, like this
Mm-hmm.
external stimuli was seen as danger.
Mm-hmm.
And so I avoided that. Um, I felt okay, but I wasn't in like vibrant health. So it wasn't until I got pregnant many years later that then I got sick again and I got triggered again. And I had a lot of different symptoms this time. So it was very confusing. I had this, honestly, my worst symptom was this skin rash, and it covered my body, and it was akin to poison ivy in terms of how itchy it was.
Oh my
And
God.
it had me waking up pretty much every night for 3 years. I was just covered in scabs from scratching myself till I was bleeding, usually at night when I was sleeping. And yeah, but I also had fatigue, and I also had anxiety, and then I had worse chemical sensitivities than I'd ever had before. And then I developed a sensitivity to Wi-Fi, like electromagnetic frequencies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I got a lot of symptoms from them. I had headaches and digestive issues, just um, a lot of symptoms that I'd had before and a lot of new ones as well.
Yeah.
And but the turning point was when my son was 3 and we went to a cottage, and I'm pretty sure there was toxic mold in the cottage that triggered the illness. Um, and they also had, she used heavily scented fragrance on the laundry.
Oh gosh.
And so the combination of the mold and the fragrance, I thought I was going to die that night. I was rocking myself. I remember in the kitchen in the middle of the night, the first night we were there, bawling my eyes out. And honestly, I think anyone who's had chronic illness would say and agree that it's the mental health aspect
Mm-hmm.
is worse than the physical. The physical
Yeah.
can be terrible,
Yeah.
but the mental is it's debilitating on a different level,
Yes.
and it's you feel completely out of control.
Yeah.
And so I just felt hopeless. I just felt completely hopeless, anxious, depressed, bawling my eyes out, rocking myself on the kitchen floor because it
Mm-hmm.
was the room that had the least amount of smells.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the turning point for me. That was my perfect storm where I just said, okay, I have to make a change. I need to figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
And that's when I discovered neuroplasticity, and the rest is history. I created a program, I recovered, and yeah, it's my brain saved me.
It's incredible because sometimes you have to get to your rock bottom before you reach, like,
Mhm.
for those resources or for that maybe different way to find a cure or solvent when you're not finding it in Western med or in whatever avenue that you're going towards. I've definitely been there in different circumstances, and sometimes you can feel like you're gaslighting yourself because you're not getting answers to the problems that you're having, and
Mhm.
you're questioning yourself because you're not getting answers, and you're questioning. That's like a mental, you start to spin out of control kind of in that way. And I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure it can just spiral in many different directions, from pain to depression to all of what you spoke about. How did you discover the rewiring your brain and neuroplasticity? How did you get into that?
So it's a little bit of a sad story. It actually started many years earlier when I was in my mid 20s. I had a boyfriend that was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and I started researching about brain health and reading about recovery stories and looking into brain foods and how we can work with our brains to recover.
Hmm.
And I found I that kind of piqued my curiosity about the brain, that initial discovery.
Hmm.
Um, at the time, there was a few books that I read, but one that I kept on my bedside table all those years was by Dr. Daniel Amen,
Yeah,
Change Your
amen. Yep.
Brain, Change Your Life. Yeah, I
Yep.
don't know if you know that
Huge
one.
fan. Huge fan.
Yeah, love him, love him.
Yeah.
And that book, yeah, it was a lifesaver at that time. So I delved into neuroplasticity, little bits of it
Hmm.
before, but I hadn't known how to apply it. So that's when I started studying Dr. Joe Dispenza, Dr. Candace Pert, um, Dr. Norman Deutsch, like all of the neuro scientists, the brain experts,
Yeah.
and I started reading stories. You Are the Placebo by Dr. Joe Dispenza was my favorite one because it was just story after story of people that had essentially healed themselves through
Hmm.
using neuroplasticity. And
Hmm.
neuroplasticity simply means that the structure in our brain changes.
Hmm.
Um, it changes through repetition, it changes when we think new thoughts, have new behaviors, do new activities.
Yeah.
And we know how stress causes disease.
Yeah.
And so neuroplasticity just shows the opposite, how elevating your mood, how joy, how learning to be present affects your health. And
Yeah.
it's incredible how much it affects your health. Like I just
Like
started
they say you are
experimenting.
what you think.
Yes,
It's so
exactly.
true. Yeah.
It really is, because our thoughts lead to our emotions, our emotions lead to our behaviors.
Mhm.
And if you just think about it, if you think back to your life of um, times when you felt really great, and you think about your those are usually the times when you met your friends, when you got jobs, like things happen when you're feeling good and your emotions are healthy and your thoughts are healthy.
Yeah.
That's when good things happen, and it's no different for our bodies. Good
Yep.
things are happening inside our bodies as well, not just externally. So it's honestly, it's miraculous, really.
It really is, and I mean, Dr. Amen, I fell into I guess you could say fell into. I don't even remember when exactly I discovered his stuff, but it was literally like 10 to 15, it was probably 15 to 20 years ago. It was a long time ago, and I had a traumatic brain injury, so I discovered him for the SPECT scans and all of that because I was wanting more answers, and I was like, there's got to be more to the story to, like, find out what's going on. And I think oftentimes, you know, we don't realize how powerful our bodies and our ability to heal
Mhm.
ourselves is. Like, we live in a culture that's very much dependent on medications and dependent on just Western med, like, here's a problem, numb it till it's, you know, to keep it at bay kind of a thing. And oftentimes we don't think of like the full healing, the fact that we can like go as far as to complete, like we will always have things come up, but like we have the ability to find answers for actual healing. And like that's super powerful, like that you discovered it back then. How did that then become something that you started realizing would help with all the other symptoms that you were having with the rashes and
Yeah.
the other symptoms that came up that didn't seem, I mean, I don't know if at the time you would have thought they were brain related.
You know what? They all started dropping away at the same time, like pretty
Yeah.
much one by one. It was within a month that it was so obvious.
Mhm.
And there was so much research now about typically, these are a lot of the typical symptoms that you'll get if you have a nervous system and brain impairment, which has also been called neural network dysfunction, autonomic nervous system dysfunction. Like
Yep.
there's so many names, but essentially it means that your brain and nervous system are impaired.
Yep.
And essentially what that means is that at some point you had enough stress in your life and it accumulated and accumulated, and it your brain then got stuck in the fight or flight, in the
Yep.
danger mode. And when your brain isn't supposed to be stuck in that mode all the time.
Nope.
It's not healthy.
Yeah.
And when it gets stuck in that mode, then things just stop functioning as well, because
Yeah.
our autonomic nervous system and our brain control virtually every bodily function. So
Yep.
if they're stuck in a fear mode, in a danger mode, then of course it just naturally means that every symptom is affected. And I was reading that, and just thinking the list is endless,
Mhm.
with every symptom that I'm experiencing is probably being affected by my brain and nervous system. And yeah, it was pretty quick. Like it was trial and error, but it really didn't take long to understand what all these doctors were talking about and
Yeah.
to apply it.
I love that you bring up nervous system because I feel like, Dr. Amen and the other science, neuroscientists, as well as actually even like the holistic psychologists and other people recognize how significant the nervous system is our with
Mhm.
our body's health. And like regulating the nervous system, that's actually part of my story. That's how I healed from anxiety, was regulating the nervous system.
Mm.
And it's something that um you know that's why I say brain health is holistic health is brain health, because our bodies are systematic and everything is connected. And,
Mhm.
oftentimes, 10, 20 years ago, you'd go to the doctor and say, I have anxiety, and they'd say, here's a medication to help your
Mhm.
brain. It's not thinking about the fact that we're holistic, like, and
Everything's
so
connected. Mhm.
yeah, and like you said, like when your body is in that constant fight or flight, it can happen from trauma and stress. Our bodies have that adrenaline, and we have that as a natural response if we're supposed to run from a tiger or something bad is happening, but it's supposed to be in a short period of time used
Mhm.
to get us out of that situation and then
Mhm.
move on. But the cortisol and the adrenaline constantly going through our system
Mhm.
creates that like dysregulation, and that
Mhm.
it goes on to create inflammation and issues everywhere, and then like you said, rashes, all these things can happen
Mhm.
because your
Yeah.
body isn't meant to be in that state all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And the fascinating part for me too was when I realized that the the stress, often the biggest stress, will happen about a year to a year and a half before your symptoms start.
Yep.
And I thought for myself back to when my symptoms started, and it was so much more than the toxic mold. I was living in toxic mold, but not everyone that lives in a house with mold reacts to mold.
Hmm.
But you'll react to mold if you have enough other stressors present, and they might be um, psychological, financial, bacterial, you
Yep.
know, like there's so many stress. It might even be nutritional, or could even be the positive stress from a wedding, planning a wedding, or for like me having a baby.
Yeah.
So, but it's just when you have, a lot of cortisol, a lot of strong emotions that are creating these hormones that,
Yeah.
yeah, your body just reaches a tipping point. And no one knows why everyone's tipping point is different. Some people can handle a lot more stress.
Hmm.
And for some people, it's because of childhood trauma. For others, it's not. Sometimes it's just, I'm not sure why some people seem to handle different amounts of stress.
I mean, I don't know either. I would kind of wonder if it has to do with our DNA and what our ancestors, and kind of how our bodies build up the tolerance over time. And different people can be stressed out by different things as well. Like, planning a wedding might be super exciting for one person and super stressful for another. And it might be,
Yeah.
like there's different levels of stress. And I think it's just really interesting because I feel like this is becoming more and more of a topic. Nowadays, people are starting to recognize, like, hey, like, this is getting to me on another level. Like, I need to find an answer. And um oftentimes, and I'm not the person to say, because I was on meds for quite a long time to handle my own symptoms, and there's a time and a place for that, is for sure.
Mhm.
But oftentimes people feel worse on medications, or they cause other symptoms that they don't want.
Mhm.
And so trying to find a holistic way that we can heal, that isn't being having to be dependent on something forever, maybe in the short term, and then we're able to find healing in another way. And I just feel like that's why I love to have people on the podcast who've had their own story that has led them to become a health coach, or someone that's actually empowering and helping other people moving forward. Because oftentimes I've noticed, if there's people who go into things like they went to school and they got an education in psychology, I have my degree in psychology, uh, that can go only so far, because you
Mhm.
don't have that lived experience.
Mhm.
And I feel like, we can empathize with people when we've had that lived experience, and that makes kind of a breaks the barrier when it comes to finding trust in other options for holistic health and healing, and brain health. And honestly, I think connection is also a huge part of healing, is not feeling
Mhm.
completely alone in the process.
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
you can feel extremely isolated and alone. Was that ever part of how you felt going through what you did before, as you were healing and trying to find answers?
Oh my gosh, yes. I mean, for most of us that have chronic illness, when the doctor doesn't have answers, you feel completely alone. And I absolutely did. And that's why I felt depressed at times and anxious, because, I felt like, well, if the doctor and many doctors couldn't cure me, then who can?
Yeah.
Nobody understands.
Yeah.
Even I saw a couple naturopaths and they weren't able at the time to diagnose my condition.
Mhm.
So, yeah, those first few years were very isolating because I also was exhausted. I couldn't get out of bed some days.
Mhm.
And and I lived alone.
Mhm.
So,
It's
I mean,
hard.
it was extremely, extremely lonely,
Yeah.
and community, social support. I mean, we know now that emotion that creates oxytocin, the love hormone, that bonding, it actually helps to create the dopamine and the serotonin in our bodies.
Yep.
And we all have had that experience where we're having a bad day or we're feeling isolated or lonely. And then we'll go out with a friend or have a long conversation with a friend on the phone. And then we feel better.
Yeah.
We've had that, our love hormone has got moving in our body and we're just feeling connected.
Yep.
Because, I mean, ultimately, none of us in the grand scheme of things are alone. And so I think when we feel that way, it's not who we really are.
Yeah.
So we're not connecting with the truth of who we are. And we're meant to be together. We're meant to help each other. We're
Mhm.
social beings. We're not meant to be alone,
Yep.
live alone, be on our computers alone all day.
Yep.
And I think our society has created that environment. So many people are, and it perpetuates chronic illness.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I mean, that's partly why I chose to be a health coach and work one-on-one with people because I know how powerful it is to have someone who's really listening to you, who has your back, who yeah, just is with you, knows you, gets you, you can be accountable to. Um, and the group situation, group coaching works for some people too.
Yep.
Um, but if you're really sick and you've been feeling really alone, then one-on-one, or even just one-on-one with a friend or, any support one-on-one, can just be what we need sometimes to give us that lift.
It's
Hmm.
true, and I mean, they've even come out recent. I don't know even how recent. I feel like this has been known for quite some time, but they compared it to smoking. That being in isolation is about as bad as smoking cigarettes like daily. And so
For your health. Yeah.
yeah, for your health. And like
Yeah.
honestly, that is the reason I created neuro wellness community. That's the reason I do this podcast. That's the reason I do panels. That's the reason I do retreats, is because people need community. They need to know they're
Yeah.
not alone. And brain health is such a huge, like, there's such a vast array of different types of brain health struggles, and it can be from trauma to emotional to just a change of something in your life that kind of spins you into something else, and or physical trauma like I went through, and all of these things, like you just explained, you start to feel alone and isolated. It's kind of scary when you're not getting answers from doctors, and it's not like you have this group of friends that are going through everything that you are, and you start to kind of question yourself and feel like, am I ever going to get an answer? And
Mhm.
having a community like this where people can go and hear stories like yours and know, oh my gosh, there's somebody else that went through what I did, and like
Mhm.
also, hey, they have a resource, they're a health coach, I could reach out to them and get help,
Yeah.
like I it's incredible to me because I've been doing this podcast for 3 years, and almost every single person that's been on here has gone from having an incredible story of trial and overcoming adversity, overcoming trauma, overcoming their own sicknesses and things like that. And they're real on their way to resilience, sharing it on here, but then they end up being, somebody that empowers others in all different ways. And those resources is also why I'm so passionate about this, is because everybody has a story and then they have a resource that can help someone
Mhm.
else. And
Yeah.
I'm just hope that anybody who's listening to this, that they'll know, like, you can reach out to Pamma, you can have access to, a health coach, somebody who's walked through something, maybe if you've gone through something similar and you need somebody to walk beside you and know, like, you're not alone. And um just feel empowered, because the fact that, like, she's a living testament that you can get through to the other side, and she's not only learned the process, she's done it and it's worked. So it's like you're a living testament of the fact that this resource is a good one, that it works. And we're all different, we all have, kind of trial and error with different things, but I feel like rewiring your brain is such a, our brains are so, like, we can rewire our brains forever. Like, we can keep working on those. And that's an incredible thing to understand, because it makes you feel like, I feel like, especially in this day and age where, like, dementia or like Alzheimer's and all these fears of, like, losing our capacity or our
Mhm.
inability to use our brains, what a
Mhm.
powerful opportunity and tool to know that, like, you can rewire your brain. Like, that's incredible.
Yeah, it really is. And, they're starting to have some studies now about cognitive decline and how it is linked to our thoughts, our emotions, our joy, exercise, how much sugar we have in our diet. Like there's all these factors that they're now saying, okay, yeah, we didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Um, but that includes also learning. And so,
Mhm.
you know, one thing that like we're all rewiring our brains every day
Mhm.
by, especially by repetition. So anything that you're repeating day in and day out, you're growing new neural networks. Those synapses are firing and wiring. And so, you know, if you know that you're rewiring it every day, then it's about, okay, how do I want to rewire it? And one thing that you can do that's super simple that I always tell my clients as well is what can you learn? What new thing can you learn? What new activity can you do? Because when you start to do a new activity, you'll start to grow some new neural networks. And then your networks for illness and despair will start to get weakened.
Mhm.
And it's just such a simple thing. Doing a puzzle, doing a crossword search, those are great ones. And
Yep.
they've now shown that that actually will improve your cognitive ability
I've heard
because we're
that.
not
Yeah.
using our brains. We have cognitive decline. They know that too. So,
Yeah.
um, just little things like that we can do that kind of snap us out because typically when we do the same thing day after day, we're on autopilot mode.
Mhm.
And that's a dangerous place to be for your brain.
Yeah.
Your brain, especially if you're not where you want to be in your life. If you're having a vibrant life and you're happy with where you're at, you're feeling healthy, you're feeling happy, lots of connections, you love your work and so forth, then great, keep doing what you're doing. But most of us, at some point get to a point where, okay, we're not feeling good,
Mhm.
where whether it's physical, mental, or emotional.
Mhm.
And it's just so great to know that, there's these, we just change it up. Change if we first rule in business, if it's not working, change it.
Yep.
And so we can just change it up. Like what new thing can you do that is going to start changing those neural networks in a positive way?
So
And
powerful. It's such a it sounds kind of complex, but it's really simple. Like,
it's very
find something
simple.
new to learn, a new skill. And I've heard that over and over again, that, like, it's really important to keep educating and learning new things, not just like new information, but like learning a new skill to do something new.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's powerful.
It is, yeah, yeah. And the repetition's a really important part because it takes about 7 to 10 days of repetition before the neural network will start to get some firmer grooves in it, said.
Mhm.
So change can be seen at that time, but it's like studying. I don't know how you used to study for an exam, but I used to study always the night before.
Yeah.
And I do well on my tests,
Mhm.
but ask me a week later what I learned, and I wouldn't remember it all because I wasn't building a neural network for it.
Yep.
Now, it's the people that study for a longer period of time, they look at their notes, they relook at their notes again and again, that they're developing stronger neural grooves in their brains, and so they're remembering it longer term.
That's
So
Wow, that's really interesting. I never even thought about that because I'm the same. Procrastination is the best like
yeah,
motivator, is like do it. You will be good for the test as long as you study right before, but that totally makes sense because you have to build that neural network and like continue to build that so that it goes through that neural network easier as time goes by so that you're not having to think so hard because you've built that neural network, but it takes time to do
yeah,
that over and over, like you're building a new skill, learning a new
exactly.
skill.
Yeah, yeah. So whatever you do, just keep doing it.
Yeah.
Keep doing it. And it's especially true for our thoughts and emotions because we live with those every moment of every day.
Yep.
And when we're sick, when we're chronically sick, we tend to have the same thoughts, such as, um, I'll never get better, or some people heal, but I won't. Or we just think about our symptoms all day long.
Mhm.
One exercise I have my clients do is I have them get a notebook and call it a negative thought symptom tracker and write down all of their thoughts about they have about their negative thoughts about their symptoms. Like, I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted. I mean, how many times are you writing it down during the day? And people are always shocked to see how often they're thinking about their symptoms.
Yeah.
And the brain is always listening. As
Yep.
Dr. Amen says, because he's titled one of his books, Your Brain is Always Listening.
Yes.
Um, and I wrote a blog about that as well on my
Wow.
website because our brains are always listening. So we have to be mindful of what we're telling ourselves because so much of what we're telling ourselves is repetitive and not helpful
Yep.
for our healing.
And we
Yeah.
can change it, like, I know, having done some of this work myself, like when you start to change your mindset and change the way that you're talking to yourself, it can feel weird or uncomfortable for the first while because you're not familiar with that. Like if you start telling yourself, no, I'm gonna have a good day, or this is gonna be a great day, I'm so excited. you know I think you posted about that recently, about you start noticing all the good things in your day when you start thinking that way.
Mhm.
But like, you can kind of mock yourself in the beginning because you're like, it feels
Yeah.
foreign to you to say that type of thing. But the
Yeah.
more you notice it, and then you notice the reward and the things that you start seeing throughout your day because you
Mhm.
start thinking that way, it
Yeah.
again, like, it kind of confirms that bias and keeps you going to keep you thinking that way, and having the desire to keep making steps forward to change your mindset and change the way that you're thinking.
Exactly. And I think it's important to note that the emotion has to go along with it. So
Mhm.
if you're just saying the words, affirmations alone won't do it. So you
Yeah.
need to actually you need to be able to think greater than you feel, and you have to be able to elevate your emotion
Hmm.
because that's when um, change really starts to happen at that level.
Would you
And
say part of it is a vision, like having a vision of it more than just a thought of it, like envisioning what that is?
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, not everyone can visualize, but even if you can't visualize, if you can talk about, what is it that you want to do? What are your goals? Where do you want to be in 6 months, in a year? What's on your bucket list? And just allow yourself to dream again, because when you're sick, um, we stop dreaming.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at little kids and they're always using their imagination, and they're always, they're in the moment, they know how to think greater than they feel. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they'll feel their emotions fully and then they're over it, and then they're dreaming big. And so Yeah, absolutely. Dreaming big, um, believing that it can happen, having hope. And it's tough when you're sick because you don't feel those things. So, yeah, you will feel like you're manufacturing it at first. And so uh, I always suggest to people then, what can you do, even if it's just a tiny little thing that brings you a little bit of joy, even just a
Mhm.
tiny bit of joy? But, you have to be the one to prove to yourself that you can do it. You
Yeah,
have to be the one to make the change. I can be a guide, but
yeah,
ultimately you're the one that has to do the work.
yeah.
And it can be easy to get stuck in a victim mindset when you've been sick
Mhm.
for a lot of years. I know I was stuck in that place for a while, but it's a dangerous place to be because
Yeah,
we tend to stay stuck in our looping pattern for, it can, well, it can go on for decades as it did for me. So
totally.
we have to be the ones to be that catalyst for change. And
Yeah,
it's going to feel foreign at first, and it's going to feel really hard at first. But once you start to see even just the smallest little bit of change, like maybe you wake up and you have a happy thought, or you have a happy feeling, oh, I could do that. Then, oh, okay, that's a small little change. That's a positive step forward. And then, okay, what's the next small little change you can do?
hmm,
My brain rewiring program is set up so that it's an hour or less a day, depending where you're at. And it's small speech and bodily movements, sitting down if you need to, because not everyone's able to stand. Um, but it's enjoyable. It's fun. It elevates your mood. And
hmm,
so sometimes, when it's hard if you've been stuck for a long time, you don't know what to do.
yeah,
So, yeah, there's my program, there's other programs. Even if you don't want to do a program, what book can you read that
yeah,
start with Joe Dispenza, you're the placebo, what can you go for a little walk around your house or around the block? Like, what can you do that you didn't do yesterday
yeah.
that is going to start to change things up? And
Yeah,
if
it's
you
like
take
baby steps until you can get
you
to the bigger ones.
exactly. You take
Yeah,
enough baby steps, eventually it'll lead to big change. And
yeah,
it's always going to be with little baby steps. They've shown now that if you make too big of change too fast, often that's when we end up failing.
yeah,
So, but when we make a tiny little step regularly, then and with brain rewiring, it can actually happen quite quickly for some people. So I don't want to say it's, slow for everyone. For some people, it's really quick. But
yeah,
um, the point is that you're doing something to make a change, to
yeah.
move yourself forward.
I love
To
that you talked about books too, because I feel like sometimes when you feel kind of stuck, that can be one of the things that feels a little bit more attainable is just starting
Mhm,
with reading something that will kind of spark that desire, excitement, or dream to kind of find health. I know I'm a huge, I love to read a lot of different books, to learn more. And that has helped me in times as well when I felt stuck. Um, and even when you were just talking about, how we are meant to be creative and dream and just like we do when we're children, and feel joy and how that, I mean, everything you said, how that affects our body and how we
mhm,
can get stuck in that victim mindset and just spiral out of control. I've been reading a new book by Jamie Winship, and he's basically like a peace talker. But he's been hired by organizations and tons of people because he really helps people get to like their identity and into their creativity again, their ability to dream and to really have that purpose deep within. And I feel like a lot
mhm,
of what he's been saying is very similar to everything you just said, and he's not even a brain health specifically
mhm,
coach or anything like that, but it's just the science, like all of this is like proven again and again and again, like,
mhm, mhm.
so thank you just for like sharing that, educating people on that, and also offering them, if they do want to reach out, we'll have your information on this when it's released. So people will be able to check out your website. I think you have a quiz as well that people can do to kind of get started with you.
Well, and even just to see if brain and nervous system is the root of their symptoms.
Oh
They
yeah.
can, yeah, they can take the quiz. There's about 30 questions. And then they will just figure out if they have, I think it's 5 or 6 or more, then it means that the brain and nervous system are likely at the root of their symptoms.
Wow.
Because sometimes people aren't sure because some of the symptoms can be very strange.
Yeah.
Um, and you wonder, is it that or is it something else? But this will tell you if you have a number of symptoms. So yeah. So
That's a
yeah,
good tool.
there's a quiz on my website. Yeah.
That's awesome. I mean, you're just so down to earth and real. You share the real story of your own journey and how that got you to where you are, and now the resources that you offer people. Just having that support person, having that person who's walked the journey and then can kind of help you find those resources. But like you said, you have to do the work. You have to have that desire, even if it's a little mustard seed of desire.
Even
Yeah,
if
just
it's
have that a little
tiny.
bit of
Yeah.
desire to make that step. Well, thank you so much for just joining the
Thank
podcast. Now you're
you.
part of the podcast community, and
Yay.
for being another resource for people to reach out to, and for sharing vulnerability, your own story, and the fact that you were at that breaking point. Because I think that's kind of when people start to reach out and realize they need something, is when they
Mhm.
get to that breaking point. So
Yeah.
I think that's a really important thing. And I can't thank you enough for sharing that, because it's a connection point for people who might feel like they're alone or their situation is too far
Mhm.
gone.
Mhm.
Let me tell you, there's nothing too far gone. If you've watched this podcast, you'll
No.
know there's really nothing too far gone. You can always find resources for resilience, and this is just another incredible tool for that.
Amazing. Yeah, you're doing such an amazing thing with your hub, your community. It's yeah. I'm very happy to see that you're in the world doing what you're doing, and thanks for having me be a part of it.
Thank you.